Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our budget workshop on July 28th, 2020. We do have a quorum. All members of City Council are present. So just a reminder that when you ask to speak, to please repeat your name and your SMD number so we get your comments recorded properly. With that, this meeting is called to order, and we are first of all going to have public comment, and the public comment is 0, so there's no public comment to offer. So we will immediately go into the workshop agenda. And the first item is discussion of matters regarding the fiscal year 2020-2021 budget preparation, including but not limited to 1, other enterprise funds, revenue, and expenditures. And Tina will make that presentation. And then number 2 is health insurance update, which Brian Kendrick will, with Julie Rickman, will make that presentation. So we are going to start with Tina. Tina, you're on.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning. Tina Diersky, Director of Finance. And this morning, as you mentioned, Mayor, we're going to be discussing the other enterprise funds. We discussed our public works enterprise funds in our last budget workshop, and now we'll discuss the rest of them in this workshop. And then coming up on August 13th, as you know, we'll be discussing the general fund budget as well. So today we'll talk about the airport, the state office building, Fort Concho, Fairmount Cemetery, the swimming pool, and the development corporation. And as you mentioned, followed by an update, the health insurance from HR. So we'll start off with the airport fund. The primary source of revenue for the airport continues to be lease income. This year there were 2 leases renewed, one for Customs Air and Marine and one for Border Patrol. So that caused a slight increase to their revenue there, offset by a decrease to their concession revenue. And that was down due to decreases, obviously, in their concessions at the airport for rental cars, the restaurants, things like that.
Stop right there, because based off of what's happening currently, do we believe that the other line being down only 93,000 is aggressively down enough? I mean,
the other line includes interest revenue and security badge fees, advertising, and then it was offset by a slight increase to landing fees. But they did project a decrease to concessions of, I believe, $55,000.
And is that current with
51,000
in the Blue Book for a month ending June?
I'm sorry, ma'am. Pardon me.
Based off of our Blue Book numbers, the end of June, is that in line with those numbers?
I think Jeremy is on the line, and he is the one that projected that revenue. If he's available to answer your question.
Jeremy, are you on?
I'm here. Can you see me?
I can't see you, but I can hear you.
Okay, I'm on a new computer and I can't get my video to work. Basically, what we've done is the FAA requires us to put our financial revenues in a certain bucket. So we're trying to align with the FAA's buckets. And so we've actually moved some of the concessions and some of the other things into the lease revenue, one of them being the charters, the casino charters that we get. So that 50,000, a lot of that's reflected into the leases and not so much into the concessions or other.
So you believe the concessions are planned down enough or conservative enough for your current trend?
Yes, I do. I think even with COVID-19, I think we're picking up pretty quick. The rental cars are back to paying their full rate, and they're still continuing to pay over their full rate because they're renting a lot of cars. So have negotiations with some other rental car companies about getting that other counter. And so I think we'll be back up to where we were with our concessions, hopefully by the start of the fiscal year.
Okay, so are the rental cars being leased because of the hail damage, or is it because of the people flying into San Angelo?
I think it's people flying into San Angelo. We also have a significant amount of rental cars that are leased, people that don't use the airport. They come out and use the facilities out there. So their jets are filling up. they're talking about adding a fourth flight in August. So I think it's people flying into San Angelo.
Okay, so you're somewhat positive, conservative, if you can be both. It looks like that's where we're at. Do I have questions from council on the revenue line for the airport fund? Okay, with not, let's move on down to the expenditure lines.
Yes, ma'am. Personnel there is up $3,600, and that's strictly due to the reallocation that we've discussed in the past related to workers' comp. So just reallocating those in a more appropriate manner throughout all of the funds. O&M is up $50,000 due to the ramp grant. That's that local match for that ramp grant that Jeremy applies for so that he can do maintenance items at the airport. And then capital is up $76,000 in anticipation of a planned purchase of a new tractor out there.
Okay, do I have questions from council on the expenditure lines? Okay, with none, we'll move on to the next fund.
Okay, the next fund we have up is the state office building fund. The primary revenue source for them, of course, continues to be rent income. It is decreased slightly due to the loss of a tenant. Other includes interest income. And so other is down strictly due to that projected decrease in interest revenue.
Do we have people interested in leasing? So if we have one tenant who's left, do we keep a list of potential future tenants?
I think Carl White is on the phone or on the line, pardon me, if he can speak to that.
Yes, we always keep an eye on that, including internal clients who may lease that space. Bob, I see you're on the line as well. But yes, we do keep an eye on that to see who might be able to lease that space.
Question is, okay, you keep an eye on a list on it. That's my question. Do we have a list of people who have inquired about renting the space?
Typically, this is Rick. Typically, of course, those are only state agencies. So yes, the state is real good about telling us if there's a client who is interested in using that, and then we keep a list of those. But typically, we've been able to accommodate all their wishes. So there's typically not a long list of others who are wanting. Usually it's a case of someone has requested they would like additional space, and we try to accommodate that.
Where are we getting the roof repaired? Has the roof been repaired?
The roof is being repaired now on the state office complex.
Okay. Any other questions from council? If not, move into the expenditure lines, please.
Yes, ma'am. Personnel, again, just that slight decrease due to the workers' comp allocations. O&M is up due to property insurance and rent to Fort Concho. And then 5 is an offset to capital for those increases and or decreases.
Okay, talk to me about the capital expenditures of $318,000. Describe what that is made up of.
That would be a question for Carl. Carl, I think that's a result of some of that debt service being freed up and the ability to use some of that freed up money for capital projects.
Yes, I believe so.
Well, to describe the capital projects.
There's always different projects at the complex, either to replace carpet, replace tiles, do other repairs. Every year there's something that we have to do.
I respect that. Again, you came up with a number of 318,000. So I'm sure that there's something that you have a list of that those expected expenditures come up to the total of 318,000.
Carl, is that, correct me if I'm wrong, but those are projections of what we have to spend, and then we would come to council, typically if we're going to do a lot of improvements, where we would ask for expenditure of those dollars if there's large amounts, but that's just the amount expected to be available in there.
I agree with that, Rick. So I think that number is largely due to having freed up and the other expenditures. And so we're able to put that into the capital account in anticipation of asking council's to do those projects. As well, in that $318,000, there is $50,000 budgeted as both a revenue and expense, and that's a pass through whenever the state when one of the state agencies asks us to do work, then we anticipate a revenue to reimburse for those expenses as well.
Yeah, so as Tina said, you shouldn't expect that necessarily all that's going to be spent. Those would be things we would come to you for, depending on what those major expenditures may be. And some years we don't have a lot, and others we have more. But
So we don't have a list of projects that we're waiting to be funded at this point.
we have been real good about trying to keep up with those, but as Tina said, typically what's always on the list is there's portions of the carpet or there's portions of the tile. As agencies move in and move out, or in this case, we've had water damage or whatever, then it kind of ebbs and flows. But typically what's on there is a constant list of things such as just general maintenance. Carpet wears out, as you can imagine, quickly in that large of a complex.
I think also, Rick, in the past, I think we've asked council to use some of these capital funds to do some projects at the fort as well.
Correct.
I have a question.
Yes, Billy, please.
Billy DeWitt, Single Member District 6. If we're budgeting an amount of $318,000 in anticipation of maintaining the building, why would we put it under capital rather than O&M?
It's more than just regular maintenance. It's smaller projects. And I believe some of this for next year is also to, one of the agencies has asked for additional space that's under design now. And I believe that's some of that funding is for that, improvements to expand that space.
Okay. Okay. I'm sorry, but when we talk about replacing carpet and replacing tile, isn't that a maintenance function?
It could be called that as well.
Generally, capital would be a bigger project, not, as Billy said, operations maintenance. And that operation maintenance is a big number, 842,551. So on the operations and maintenance, what makes up that 842,000? So maybe we can better understand the capital line if we understand the operations and maintenance piece.
Bob, have you been able to get online? Carl, have you contacted Bob?
Yes, I have.
Okay, let me call him and see what's going on that he's not on.
Because if you look at the combined, that's over a million one. So I think we need some detailed information in terms of what that
And
million is.
we can get that for y'all as well.
I can tell you in O&M, just looking at the blue book, included there is professional service, utilities, maintenance type items. Looks like the rent of land and buildings is included there as well, and the debt service payments.
And what's the debt service payment?
107. Right now, it looks like it's about just over 150,000 combined between the Chase building and the Annex building. That's for the current year.
Yes, but what's in the budget?
That's what I'm looking for that, Mayor. I was just looking at the blue book to get you some detailed line items, but let me figure out what the debt service payment is for next year as well. $153,000, Mayor.
153,000.
Yes, ma'am.
So 153,000 minus the million one. So we've got, 900 and some thousand. I'm looking for some detailed information on.
Yeah, about $315,000 is for rent of land and buildings. Utilities, their budget is approximately $140,000. Maintenance, they budget about almost $60,000. And professional services, there's a budget of about $161,000. And then personnel budget is about $125,000.
Well, but we have a personnel line of 122,000 in this.
Oh,
line.
yes, I'm sorry. Yes, you're correct, Mayor. So that wouldn't be included in O&M. I was just looking at the blue book, like I said.
And the debt service number was what?
153,000.
Okay, so we're at about 500,000, that's $1 million. So we got another 500,000 we need details on.
Well, right, the capital line is 320,000 of that.
No, well, okay, so we are adding the 842 and the 318 plus, so
Yes,
you're
ma'am.
at 1,200,000 basically, or 1,100,000 something.
And Bob can get a lot of that detail. He can hear what's going on, but is unable to talk. So he's trying to figure out what's going on there. So if we want to revisit this, we can, and we can get that for you once we can get him online.
Well, we've got Fort Concho coming up soon. I mean, might be right after the state office fund. So we're going to need to be able to talk to Bob Bluehart because of the Fort Concho piece that we're talking about today as well.
Julia, do I need to get him to try to call in again? I know you just texted me back.
I just told him to do that and I resent him the link.
Mayor, when I add up all those numbers, I'm getting really close to $800,000. So maybe you missed one.
Well, I was combining 842 and 318, which is $1,000,001 something. So,
Okay.
Tina, Mayor, good morning. This is Bob. Can you hear me?
we can hear you.
Good morning.
My apologies. I was locked out of the meeting for some reason, but I have heard all of your questions. I assume Tina has given you some background. Is there anything that we've missed?
No, I just believe that when we're looking at expenditure lines of $1,000,001 plus, we need to understand what that $1,000,001 is made up of, because you had to have something in your hands to total up to those numbers. So I'm just asking for the detail and the detail.
Sure, and I'm sorry I missed the last 5 minutes. Are you on the state or on the fort?
We're on the state. If there's no further questions from council on the state office fund, then we'll move to the fort. So do I have, Billy, do you have your questions answered?
Yes, I do. The only other question I had, Mayor, Tina, on the expenditure line, rent of land and buildings, what is that?
That is I believe that's the lease payment to the fort. Is that correct, Bob?
That is correct. That has been a part of the budgetary structure of these buildings in the fort since these buildings were renovated into the state office complex 22 years ago.
So that's the state paying. I'm
Paying
sorry, I missed.
Yes.
That is
The
the
city /
payment.
fort. Go ahead, Bob.
I'm sorry, that is the revenue mostly represents the lease payments by the various state agencies into that 201 fund. The payment to the fort represents a share of that is given to the fort for its operations. And this was all designed more than 20 years ago when this project was commissioned and the building was renovated into the state offices. So the state doesn't directly pay the city, it pays its leases into the fund, and the fund allocates a portion of that to the fort. Because the fort over 30 years ago was the organization that purchased this property that eventually has become the state office complex.
When will the debt payment, when is the debt paid up? I know we talked about
The
one
debt,
over with already.
the debt for the Chase building, remember there are two separate buildings. The debt for the Chase building will be paid off, I believe, at the conclusion of fiscal 23. The debt for the workforce building, I think, is another year or so beyond that. Both buildings will be paid off in full in the next 3 to 5 years.
Okay. Billy, further questions?
No, I'm good, Mayor, thanks.
Okay. With that, any other questions from council members on the state office fund? Okay, with none, we'll move on to the next category, which is the Fort Concho Fund. Bob, are you going to present it, or Tina, are you?
I will let Tina start, and now that I'm on the line, I can fill in with any details or answer any questions.
Okay.
That sounds good. So, of course, Fort Concho operations are funded through tax dollars. Of course, as we just discussed, the state office building support and program income. Bob is projecting rentals to be down $12,000 for next year. The general fund transfer in is at a decrease due to the correlated decrease in that O&M line down there, which is decreasing for insurance. And then the decrease there is related to interest income, and I think a slight decrease for donations expected.
So you want to talk about rent and programs, what that basically $650,000. What are the specifics within that?
Certainly. The total operation budget for fiscal 21 represents a decline of $47,663. And if you look on the summary sheet, that's evenly split between a $24,000 less transfer from the city, and we understand revenue is going to be tight in the upcoming year, and an almost equal amount from our programs and operations. The shortest answer to any question on revenue for next year on programs is, I don't know. We are all in the COVID situation together. We are watching it almost daily. Perhaps my figures will shift, and what I'm proposing is that initially we will have this decline, and what we can do is monthly and quarterly, adjust the budget as we go along. We're looking also at the serious issues regarding the Christmas event in December. We have seen a little uptick in rentals. We have seen good, although not great, attendance. And everything else is tied to the ability of people to come and see us, use us, and enjoy us as a historic site. And I don't think any one of us can predict where we're going to be 2 weeks, 2 months, or even a year out. So it's based on my best estimates, and I'm very willing to adjust it as we go along throughout the upcoming fiscal year.
We obvious't know that Concho Christmas is a big fundraiser for the fort, and it's an important part of raising revenue. So I just want to make sure that you have a game plan. I know it's hard to have a game plan for alternative ideas for December.
We are looking at that, Mayor and Council, very, very carefully. The problem, of course, is the Christmas event requires a very long lead time, and we're already 2 months behind. But we're a little leery about making commitments, taking in money, and commissioning contracts for merchants if we don't know where the event is going. Our current plan is we're going to be visiting with merchants, volunteer groups, and other stakeholders in the coming 2 to 4 weeks. And my best guess is we will need to make some final decision by between Labor Day and the end of September, because by then it will be too late for us to commission an event that's safe and manageable. We're looking at our other income lines and our expenses very, very carefully. We're being extraordinarily conservative other than maintenance in what we do. And we're just going to try to hold the line and see where we be in the coming 30 days.
Can you update us on the maintenance items?
Certainly.
The work. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. The large contract that will be on Council's agenda for consideration and approval on August 4 will cover the remaining 14 buildings. That will include columns, fascia boards, cupolas, windows, and trim. that will virtually take care of the exteriors of all the remaining buildings in question, including the very ugly columns on Barracks 1 and 2. We also have ongoing work in creating columns in our shop that will be installed throughout the year. The roofs were all done as of a month ago under the contract with Harrison Roofing. And we have almost caught up on all of the damage from the May 21 storm. There's just little bits here and there we have to do. So I am hoping by the time we have this conversation next year, we're going to be in much, much better shape.
Hey, do I have questions from council for Bob Bluehart on the revenue lines as presented?
Yes, Mayor. Billy DeWitt, Single Member District 6. And my question may be more for Tina. Tina, I'm looking in the Blue Book on page 34. And for the current budget, it shows a $350,000 transfer in. Is that included, or a similar figure included anywhere in the 2021 budget for revenue?
No, ma'am. That was a budget amendment related to those projects that I was just speaking to, where council authorized the allocation of about $100,000 total for those projects. And so we transferred in $300,000. A portion of that was from, I believe, the state office building, and a portion from the risk management fund for those insurance claims.
Okay, so there is not a similar amount included in our proposed budget for 2021?
No, ma'am. Again, that was a list of projects that was brought to council after the adoption of the original budget. And so once council authorized that budget amendment, then we transferred that money in and created the budget in the Fort Concho.
Okay, so do you anticipate, or maybe does Bob anticipate, that we would have a similar need in the next year?
The best way, Counselor, to answer that is that this place is a 24/7 maintenance event. There's always something to fix. The large contract that Council hopefully will approve on August 4 will put in motion the work to fix virtually all of the nagging exterior issues. But we are in a constant maintenance mode, and I expect that we will be identifying other needs throughout the year. There is, in the maintenance capital line item in fiscal 21, anticipated excess funds left over, and those will help us build columns in our shop and address other issues as they come up throughout the year.
All right, thank you.
You are welcome, and we'll see you this evening.
Yes, you will.
With that, we'll move into the expenditure lines.
I'm sorry, Mayor, please repeat.
Yes, we're finished discussing the revenue lines. We'll now move into the expenditure lines.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, again, there's a decrease to personnel of $19,000, again, related to the reallocation of workers' comp. O&M is down $22,000. As we discussed, that decreased to their property insurance, or insurance, pardon me. And then capital is down $6,000 related to budget for technology capital items.
Any questions concerning these expenditure lines? Okay, with none, then we will move into the next fund.
The next fund, Mayor, is the Fairmount Cemetery. There are very few changes for Fairmount Cemetery, pardon me. There's a slight increase to general fund transfers, and that is adjust that number as more or less support is needed by the cemetery to attain their budget. There are no changes to columbarium and no changes to other.
And the other is what?
Other includes trust income and interest.
Okay. Questions from council on the revenue lines? With none, we'll move into the expenditure lines.
Okay, personnel is up there by $11,000. That's strictly due to an increase to their retiree insurance payment. And O&M is down just as an offset to the other changes in their budget.
where does the money for landscape upkeep, where is that? Is that an O&M?
That would be included in the O&M, yes, ma'am.
And is there a plan to do any of the, I guess you call them streets in Fairmont Cemetery Fund over the next year? If some of those streets driving through there are pretty wicked.
We can work with operations to see if they can fit that in. Yes, some of them do definitely need some work. But this budget doesn't reflect that at this point.
All right, so we're gonna just leave them as they are? No plan
Oh,
to
man.
improve them?
Typically, there has not been a lot of money allocated in the cemetery fund where they can afford much of that, historically, what I've seen. And so typically, as operations are doing projects, if there's certain cross streets there that we would like resurfaced, then they try to work that into their overall plan. Excuse me. So what we could do is in this coming year, talk to Shane and see if there's some flexibility in some of his projects where some of those worst streets can be done.
I think they really need to be looked at. They're
Good
wicked.
point.
Do I have questions from council on the expenditures? With none, we'll move on to the next fund.
The next fund that we're going to discuss is really more of a pseudo fund, if you will. The municipal pool is accounted for within the general fund, but it does carry its own fund balance that is allowed to be carried over whenever there's revenue over expenditures or when the opposite is true as well. They are allowed to carry over those excess revenues in anticipation of upkeep and at the swimming pool. The main reason we brought it to you this year was that obviously you can see there are very few changes projected, but with COVID and everything, staff's uncertain, about what the revenue source is and how they're going to react and what kind of impact that will have next year. So we just wanted you to be aware that there may be a need in the future, probably temporarily, for some support from the general fund. We just wanted you to be aware of what those needs might be.
How are we doing on admission fees?
I think Brent's on the line, isn't he?
Yes.
Yes, can you?
Talk about admission fees. Are more people or less people using the municipal pool right now?
Currently, we have it set to a limit of 100 people, but most days we're not even reaching that, man. It's very limited people coming in. We were doing really well with rentals and parties and things like that, but we currently do have a lot of people canceling the week of their party and things like that. So we were booked almost fully for the private rentals, but unfortunately they're dropping a lot of them due to family members or someone is actually coming in contact with someone with COVID and catching the disease or the virus. So,
Okay, Brent, thank you.
yes, ma'am.
Do we have further questions on the municipal pool from anyone? Okay, let's move on.
Yeah, if you can use your cell and keep telling you talking.
Sorry.
Okay, so we're moving into the expenditure lines. Any questions on the expenditure lines from council? All right, with none, we will move into the next fund.
Our next fund is the City of San Angelo Development Corporation. Of course, as you know, this is split up between the economic development side at 28% and the ballot side at 72%. So we'll first present the economic development side. We are projecting sales and use tax to be down $3,000. As you recall, Mayor, we budget sales and use tax in accordance with whatever the city ultimately decides to do with its budget so that we can remain consistent. This sales tax number is projected as flat for March, April, May, June, and July, flat with the current year as the decreases that we've already seen. And from there on for the remainder of a full year, projected down 10% each month. And then after that, for the remainder of the fiscal year, projected flat with this current year with the decreases that we've already seen. It
Well,
is
that's, okay, that,
a 5% discount from the current year budget which was already conservative.
well, I'm a little concerned because it looks like we're only planning it down $3,000, and with planning down 10% or flat, it would seem to me that that decrease would be a much larger decrease.
Yes, ma'am. The reason it appears that way is that we budgeted $18.6 million, $18.6 million. But in the prior year, we had actually received $19.9 million. And that's where I was going with the fact that we have already budgeted very conservatively, because that's how we choose to act as a city. And with that, as you've seen from the sales tax reports that we've been putting out, we still haven't reached a shortfall to our current sales tax revenue budget. And so that's why we feel like this is still a conservative number. However, that is the reason, as you'll recall, that we asked to move the general fund budget workshop so that we could get one more month of sales tax numbers under our belts, and then make one more projection before we bring this to you for the general fund workshop. And of course, as I mentioned, we would then adjust these numbers for the development corporation in accordance with what city council decides to do.
Yeah, my guess is we need to be planning the general fund down at least 8 to 9%, perhaps 10% for the entire year. So this would be pretty aggressive in terms of expectations compared to what I think we're going to see in our overall 2020-2021 budget. So
Yes,
this
ma'am.
number is not a good number. I wish it was a good number. I'd love for it to be a good number, but I think it's far more aggressive than what we're going to experience.
What you're seeing right now is actually projected at a 5.2% decrease. So again, as I mentioned, when we get those sales tax numbers on August 12th, we will make one more projection before we bring a final recommendation or projection to city council.
Yes, because this looks like it's pretty much flat.
Yeah, and the total between the two is about $11,000. But again, because we already budgeted conservatively, this current fiscal year, we also budgeted at a significant decrease from that prior fiscal year, what we actually received. And so we as a city have planned well and planned conservatively. And so we have not seen quite the impact that maybe some of our other cities are seeing.
Well, one's against budget, one's against actual numbers. So we plan conservatively, and thank goodness, because the reality is that we have had an impact on our sales tax lines. So I'm just saying, I think we're going to have to re-review these numbers. And my hope is that we have a strong 2021, but I think these are more aggressive than what we're going to see. So we will wait and see where we go on August the 12th.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, and then other just includes the interest income, and that is projected down $147,000.
Okay. Do I have questions from council or comments on these numbers? All right, let's go into the expenditure line.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. Expenditure personnel is down $1,600. That's in correlation with the staff services and admin contract services agreement with the city. O&M is down $31,000, and capital is down $116,000, and that's just to offset the decrease in interest income.
All right, what are the assigned projects?
Assigned projects are those projects that the development corporation has already committed to and already has an agreement with an entity. And so that would be the amounts available next year that they have for incentive projects.
And unassigned projects are what?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was looking at the wrong line. Assigned projects are those that have already been committed. Unassigned projects, that means that that amount is available for other projects next year.
Okay, do I have questions from council? All right, we'll move to the next slide.
So your final slide for the enterprise funds in this workshop is the COSA DC ballot side. Again, same projection for sales tax, same methodology right now until we get further results on sales tax revenue. And other, again, is down for interest income.
Okay, and moving into expenditures, what's the 6,500,000 on O&M?
That is almost entirely debt service payments. But again, that increase of $500,000 is related to the West Texas Water Partnership Agreement.
So it's up 512,000 and capital is down for what's
Yes.
it?
So the O&M line is up that $512,000 almost entirely due to the agreement for the West Texas Water Partnership for the Fort Stockton Holdings, and the Development Corporation ballot side is, of course, helping to fund that payment, or actually funding the entire payment. And then there is a slight increase to the debt service payments there as well, less than 100,000.
Okay,
And capital, that is down $589,000, entirely just to offset the decreases to revenue and the increase to the O&M line. So what's in that capital line for both this and the development side is basically what you'll see in your blue book that we call future projects. So it's kind of acts like a contingency account where they have monies available if they have a project that comes up within that current fiscal year, that they have that available and ready to provide those incentives or other projects.
okay. Council, any questions? Any comments? Need for any more information? With none, move on.
Yes, ma'am. And at this point, I'll hand the baton to Brian Kendrick and Holmes Murphy and allow them to update you on health insurance.
Good morning, Council. This is Brian Kendrick, Director of Human Resources. Let me take off my mask so I can talk. I'm going to let Julie Rickman from Holmes Murphy kick off with a presentation, and then we'll both be available for any questions as we go through that.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. So I think that we've got, is Julie, you're running the presentation, is that correct? I can share my screen on my side. I just want to make sure that I can.
Typically, whoever's speaking runs their own slides, but if we need to run them.
I am happy to share mine. All right. All right. Can we see that?
No.
All right, let me try this again. Screen one. Sorry about that. Give me just one moment. All right, that should be working now. Is that correct?
It is.
All right, perfect. Okay. So just to go over a little bit of the health fund again, Julie Rickman with Holmes Murphy. Holmes Murphy is your insurance consultant for your medical and your health fund. You probably recognize me from last year when we talked through the marketing for our medical plan. So today I'm just giving you an update on how we're doing in our medical. And then any questions you have, again, if you feel free to hop in and ask any questions, and Brian's here to answer any additional questions as well. Just to give you a little bit of background, and I try and do this every time, the city of San Angelo for your medical claims has historically, at least over the last 10 years, has been significantly lower than the business for Aetna. That was a big portion in due to the relationship that was with community. Your as well, meaning how are you performing against the marketplace as far as your medical trend has always been lower than normal as well. And then when we did our marketing last year, that contract that we were able to negotiate.
About every other word, it's breaking up really bad.
Am I breaking up bad? Okay, hold on. Let me see if I turn off my video, if that helps at all. All right, can you hear me any better that way?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, perfect. So do you want me to start from the beginning? Would that be better?
Why don't you?
Okay.
We're seeing your presenter's view instead of the full screen of the slide. That might make it easier for our online viewers if you had the full screen showing.
Yes, I can do that. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So let me go ahead and start from the very beginning again. Sorry about that. Julie Rickman with Holmes Murphy. Hopefully my voice is coming through a little bit better at this point. Is that better, Mayor?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, excellent. So again, you might recognize me from last year, although you can't see my face at the moment. I've worked on your marketing efforts for last year. And so really what we're going to do today is just talk through how your plan is running and then see if you have any questions or concerns about how the City of San Angelo's health fund is running. So just looking back on the history, your claims experience for your medical plans have been historically, and over the last 10 years, have been significantly lower than the Aetna book of business. And that really has a lot to do with the relationship and the contracts that we had through community. And that also reflects back into our overall trend, which is lower than the market, significantly lower than the market. When we did our negotiations and our contracts through to marketing from last year, that actually created a better contract than we had before. And so we've really had some luck when it comes to what we've been able to keep your plan and keep your plan as solvent as it has been over the last few years. Advance real quick. So looking back at your medical, and so there's a lot of numbers on this, and actually it goes back to May of 2016 through March of 2020. Your medical trend is looking at 2.5%. And so when we look at normal medical trend over the years, it's been as high as 10% and as low as 6.5% or 7%. So 2.5% over the fullness of your plan is actually very significantly less than everyone else sees. So when we look at this chart, when you're looking at that,
Better explain that. The 2.5% is what?
it is how your plan is running. So when we're looking at let's go look at the yellowish line. That is each month where your claims are setting at. The purple line is the best fit curve for those lines. And so when you look at that slope of that curve, the slope of your medical has increased by 2.5% since 2016, which is significantly lower than what the market looks like. So those yellow points is, kind of the up and down, the volatility of a plan. You see, maybe you have a month with high claims data. So when we look at February, March of 2020, we had some significantly high months. But when we look and we try and normalize that over the fullness of time, your trend for medical is 2.5%, which is, again, incredibly good compared to what the market is.
Okay.
I know we had some discussions prior with the prior presenters regarding COVID. And so I really wanted to give an update on that. So for the COVID, the way that the plans work is COVID expenses for members are paid at 100%. So meaning that if someone is diagnosed with, needs to get testing and things like that, that is paid at 100%. And that has to do with federal regulations. But also there's an impact to our claims spend because of COVID. And actually this is something that is helping your plan. We have a lag for elective surgeries, meaning that if I needed to get a knee surgery in earlier this year, I would have had to have delayed it because our surgeons weren't performing surgeries in the beginning of the year. So when we're looking at this, there's a few months that we had where we had some drop down in our claim spend because of people putting off elective surgeries. We'll see some of that pick up again when as time goes on and people are able to go get their surgeries done. But that also is contingent on, is there a bed available? Is there a surgeon available? Things like that. So it's not as though we have a drop off those couple months and then we'll have 2 months of significantly high claims. It really is, it's going to spread out a little bit more when we start to see those lags back in. The other thing with those elective surgeries is there might be something such as someone had a back issue that they were going to have a surgery for and decided, hey, I'm not going to get that done now, or they found an alternative to be able to treat that condition. So we might not even see those things pick back up again. So that actually helps our spend. We've also seen a big increase in teledoc, so our telemedicine, where people can call in to a phone number and talk to a doctor on the phone. This has always been especially helpful, and I know that there's some folks on council that have used these benefits before. But basically, if I have a child with an ear infection, instead of going to the doctor and sitting down in the physician's office and getting my prescription and going to the pharmacy, I can do a call over the phone, talk to the doctor about what's going on with my child, and able to get a prescription over the phone without having to leave the comfort of my own home. With COVID, that actually has happened to increase our utilization, which is good because the costs of those claims are significantly less than someone going to a physician or urgent care for something that might be able to be treated effectively by a less costly means. And then the last piece of this is behavioral shifts. We also saw, we oftentimes on most medical plans will have people going to the emergency room as their primary care physician because they don't have one. This is just kind of their standard where they go to for care. And there's education that HR does around that, but we'll always have some folks that utilize the ER probably not in the most effective manner. And so we've seen with COVID a behavioral shift with emergency room utilization and people really going to the emergency room really for true emergencies, again, more so than those lesser care types of care that they need. Any questions on this?
No, keep going.
Okay. So our pharmacy is a little bit of a different story. When we're looking back on our pharmacy, you can see actually our yellow line, and this is not surprising, doesn't have as much volatility as our medical line when it comes to the actual month-over-month claim spend. But you'll see our pharmacy is actually, the trend on that is 15.9%. So there's a few reasons for that when we look at our pharmacy, and I'll hop to the next one. And I'm gonna go specifically to the second bullet. High cost specialty drugs are on the rise, and there's positives and negatives with specialty medications. And really the specialty medications are those medications that are treating very specific conditions and are able to, in some cases, cure or reverse effects of specific medical conditions for particular people's body types and genomes. It's great because it does that, but because they're very specific and they're, they're just incredibly expensive drugs. And so one of the things that we do with Aetna and CVS contract is we're monitoring your plan constantly with your pharmacy to ensure that we're mitigating future plan spends as best as we can. And then we're continuing to benefit from the contract because of that Aetna and CVS relationship. So CVS bought out Aetna a few years ago, and that actually helps our pharmacy contract considerably. There is a very, very nominal COVID impact to our pharmacy, and that's just because you're not taking your blood pressure medication because you can't go outside. For most folks, your medications, you'll still going to get your medications and take the medications you need. So that's just how your pharmacy is looking right now. Again, we continue to monitor over the year. We make adjustments to the plan. So for example, a medication has a generic equivalent that comes out. We might put the generic equivalent in a different tier and move a brand name to another tier at some point, especially if it's not impacting any members. There's a lot of looking at pharmacy because that's definitely something that will continue to rise in the future just because of the nature of medications and how we're producing them now. But again, it's something we're looking at and want to continue to keep a very close eye on. So when we're looking at our assumptions for our budget, and so I'm going to go over a few slides with a bunch of numbers on them, but I'll kind of give you that focus of where I'd like you to look at. We assume and the medical trend at 6.8%. So what that means is we take a survey of all the major carriers, so Blue Cross, Aetna, Cigna, additional consultants, and find out what number they are using for trend, and that's the number we use. When we're looking at your prior trend at 2.5%, we're also taking into account how you've historically ran as well, but our medical trend we use in our budget assumption is 6.8%. Pharmacy, our standard trend for the market right now is 7.1%, and that's the number that we use in there. We also take a normalization of how your plan has performed in the past and have a starting point that is based off of how your plan has performed. And so when we're looking at this, it's not we're just looking at 6.8, but we're actually looking at your historical performance. In our budget assumptions, we're also including COVID-19 lag, again, meaning that when we're looking at these numbers, we're taking into consideration some delay of those elective surgeries and giving some credit back to your future months to indicate that we'll realize some of those, that lag in the future. We're indicating that there's no plan design changes, meaning that we're not changing deductibles, co-pays, co-insurance, any of that. Your employees, your members' plans will remain the same. These are assuming a 4.4% increase to both employees and the city. And I'm going to show you what that looks like from an employee perspective next. And we assume that enrollment remains the same, meaning that we're not having people jump from high to low, low to high. And that's partly because we're not looking at a very large increase, but also there's no plan design changes that would encourage members to move from one plan to another. So this has a lot of numbers on it, but really what I want you to focus in on is those bottom 3 lines. So we have 3 plans with the city of San Angelo that members can enroll in. And when we're looking at that 4.4% increase to the current rates, we're looking at that bottom 3 lines is showing the increase per pay period. So we have 24 pay periods in a year. That means that on your low plan for an employee only, we're looking at 45 cents increase per pay period. And the highest that anyone would increase would be $23.34 per pay period. And that's in your high plan, including all your family members. I'll pause for 1 second so you can look at those numbers, and then I'll hop to your current enrollment so you can see where your folks are actually sitting in. So this shows you where your actual current enrollment is for your individuals when we look at your plans. And so you'll see that for your high plan, you have a very small percentage of your population that are sitting in the high plan. Only 18 folks in that employee only and nobody in the family plan. The majority of your folks are sitting in that low plan, employee only. And so that would be that small increase of that 45 cents per pay period for that low plan employee only. Any questions on enrollment or the increase for employees?
No, I think the big question will be when we look at the totality of that, because when we just look at it specifically in terms of enrollment and or dollars per month, it doesn't give us the impact that the budget's going to take.
Yep. So that's actually the next slide. So there's a bunch of numbers on here, but really what I wanted you to focus on is pretty much that center of the page, where we're looking at employer contribution and employee contributions. So the first column shows what our budgeted plan year for 2020 is. And when we're looking at employer contribution, it is 6.146 million. The proposed budget with that 4.4% increase is 6.545 million, which is a difference of $399,000. And that's the city's impact. When we're looking at employee contribution, which is a line directly below that, going up from 1.743 million to the 1.812, that's an increase of $69,000. So what this does is it levels out, and I'm going to go to the next slide just to kind of talk through that really quick. It keeps our plan solvent. It levels out and makes sure that we don't have a huge deficit back to our plan, that $400,000 deficit. It keeps the, again, lower than market trend at a 4.4% increase. Historically, the city doesn't have a whole lot of increases to employees, especially. And so 4.4%, especially when looking at spreading the risk among, or spreading those dollars amongst your entire population, is not a lot of money to individual members. The plan design changes, we can do plan design changes to increase the, to absorb the increase, but it would increase the member out-of-pocket costs. And then the last piece is obviously that Shannon acquisition, which I know is kind of on the backs of everyone's minds. It does have uncertainty for the future. We're not sure how the plan's going to change in the future. Right now, Aetna works to maintain that contract integrity, and we don't see any changes in the foreseeable, very near future, but there likely will be some. But the positive of that acquisition is that those network deficiencies that we've had issues, and I know folks on council had concerns last year when I spoke about some folks that might not have access to care. Those network deficiencies should be resolved as we continue to change that. As for now, the Shannon acquisition is, we are keeping our plan the way that it is. It's performing the exact same way that it did before with our community facilities and relationship. we're tweaking that as we go along to, again, make sure that we're maintaining the integrity of our contract and we're not having our costs rise up considerably at any kind of junction. So we're monitoring that, we're keeping an eye on that, and we're continuing to change for that.
Well, Julie, we're very specific in asking questions when the presentations were made last year in regards to if communities sold, what would happen, and we were told 100% that the plan would not change. So as we talk about uncertainty for future, that might be, but it has nothing to do with this year's budget.
Correct. That is correct. So when I say uncertainty for the future, this might mean that in the future, we may allow individuals to go to Shannon facilities. We might change some things around again when it comes specifically to network deficiencies, those types of things. So you're correct. Our current contract is not changing and we don't have any changes to what we're doing currently. It's just, we're not quite 100% sure how we're going to make changes in the future because of this acquisition. So
we're talking about today. We're talking about today's budget, and
correct.
Current contract is for another two and a half years. So it's not something we need to spend time on today.
Sounds good. All right, and that's all I have for you today. I don't know if Brian wanted to add anything specifically or if there is any questions from council at all on this.
Well, my question is, how do we come up with the $399,000 as a city? Because money is money, and where do we get the money?
As far as where are you getting the dollars from, or where do I get the increase from?
Well, the employer contribution goes up from $6,146,000 to $6,545,000. So the difference between those two, the budget current and the proposed budget, is a big dollar amount that we've got to figure out where the dollars come from.
Mayor, if I may, this is Tina Diersky, Director of Finance. That is usually something that we will try to work through at the general fund budget workshop. And at that point, we can work on these numbers, make sure that we have everything exactly accurate, and bring forward what portion is actually allocated to the general fund versus the other funds.
Okay, your voice, there's a back talk to your voice, so we can't really understand what you're saying clearly.
I think it's
Okay.
Okay, I think HR may be corrected their microphone. So if you'll repeat that again, Tina, if you don't mind.
Yes, ma'am. This health insurance increase is something that we usually work through at the general fund budget workshop. And so we will work on these numbers, make sure we have everything accurate. And when we come back for the general fund workshop, how much of that increase is related to general fund versus all of the other funds.
Yes, because we're gonna have to figure out the dollar amount and whether it's a 50-50 split as it is presented,
yes,
or it's not a 50-50. And so today,
yes,
you're reflecting a 50-50 contribution from employer and employee, but that hasn't been decided yet. So this is something that you're saying we'll discuss further, but I think we need to have questions from council or comments from council at this point in preparation for the general budget.
And Mayor, if I may just follow up on that, usually when we bring this back for discussion and decision on how much will be employer versus employee, HR will bring a couple of options based on all employee, all employer, half, and that kind of a thing. And so I think Brian probably could have that prepared as an item for that workshop. Is that correct, Brian?
He might have gotten off, Tina, when we had that microphone problem. I'm not sure.
Okay, I'm unmuted now, I think. Yes, we can have that all ready at the general fund workshop to talk through that. Again, this is the 4.4%. We're just using that as a starting point for the discussion. We know council will make that decision ultimately, but we just wanted to throw something out there so you'd have a point of reference when we, as we move forward into the general fund discussion.
Okay, council, does anyone have a question or comment to make at this point?
Mayor, question. Tommy Hebert, single member District 1. Tina, a question for you. I am assuming, I think I maybe heard you say that there would be options presented if council wanted to get money from this source or that source. When this comes back for the general fund portion of the discussion, there'll be options on if we want to fund it all, if we want to share with employees, et cetera, that those options will be presented to us.
Yes, sir. And if you'll recall, by that time, we'll have both better sales tax projections as well as property tax valuations and any increase to that revenue source. And so as usual, we will bring you any marginal revenue or deficit and try to work through those changes and decisions with you. And yes, in the past, usually, I believe HR usually brings a all employee, all employer, or some combination of the two.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Council, anyone else? Okay, continue.
That was all I have from my side, unless Brian has anything additional from HR. Again, just giving an update. We'll certainly give you options for you to be able to present when you're doing your final budgeting. But this is I think it's a even option on the table as far as considering how your plan is running, COVID lag, and just the impact to members. So if you have any other questions, feel free to ask HR. And unless Brian has anything else, I'm completed.
No, I think that's all we have. Again, this is kind of a primer for our discussion, our more involved discussion next time.
Okay, with that, it concludes the agenda items. Unless, do we have any other items that council needs direction on? Okay, with none, what we'll end up doing is having a motion for adjournment.
Mayor Tommy Hebert, single member District 1, move we adjourn.
And a second.
Harry Thomas, single member District 3.
And with that, we'll take a vote. All in favor of adjourning this budget session, say aye.
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 With none opposed, meeting concludes. Thank you.